Okay, so as Stephanie said, my name is Siobhan Bonisteel. I would say that my work is really focused on what I call eco-social transformation through sustainable food systems. This year, I started my PhD at the University of Toronto in environmental science with a food systems focus. And mainly over the last decade, I've been working with organizations and community groups to develop their local food capacity. So as we go along, I'd really like us to keep in our mind this question: is it charity or is it justice? Because hunger is not just an issue of charity, it's actually an issue of justice. And at the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank, probably one of the best lines that I've used in many of my presentations is by June Anderson, and she's the spiritual care provider for over 30 years at the food bank. And she would always say, we mop the ocean with a paper towel. It's a big job and it's never ending. So mostly my work has been across these organizations, either for or in partnership with. And when we think about local food as a transformational agent, what we're seeing is local food helping to increase food security, belonging and social capital and cooperative learning among participants, justice, equity, and decolonization, also helping us as a community on the ground level to adapt to climate change, and teaching us all about ecological stewardship and what that actually looks like. So of course we have to ask ourselves the why. Why are we doing this work? Well, what we know is that the average income for people who are living in poverty is about $816.50 every month. But 69% is spent on rent and utilities. We can see here that rent is 31% of that number. So people are left with about $7.33 a day for everything, for all of their food, for any entertainment, and also, transportation. And what we know from research is that people actually skip meals for rent to be able to use the phone, for transportation, and to be able to pay their bills. And what we know is that local food is better for a number of reasons. So we know that it has, that it's better for the environment, because we know that industrial farming has issues like soil erosion, salinization, desertification, and loss of soil fertility. Also, monocropping is really terrible for diversity and for pollinators. We also know that local food is really good for the economy. This is actually from the US, so these are not global statistics, but from the US alone, it's estimated that increasing the consumption of local food by only 5% could translate into a net benefit of over $100 million for the region. So when we buy locally, that the money circulates locally and helps the local economy. And the next really is health. So we know that disease is on the rise and has been since a reliance on industrial food. Also, herbicides and pesticides are dangerous for the planet, but also for our own health. And we know that pasture-raised animals have higher levels of omega-3s. So really, the local food movement is both an ecological one and a social one that benefits people's health. So when we're thinking about local food in an organization, what we've come to understand is that an organization is only as progressive as they decide to be, which is first based on the knowledge of the why. Justice is then the direction or action an organization takes based on the understanding of this why, which then becomes embedded within the organizational structure. Only when local food and its value is embedded within the organization's mission does it have real impact within the food charity system. So then the question is, how does local food benefit a nonprofit charity? How does it benefit a nonprofit charity to engage with local food systems? And that's because a nonprofit organization is still a business. So really, they need to have an incentive to engage with local food. And the question is, why should they? What we've come to understand is that there are many, many ways that an organization, a food charity organization, will benefit from engaging in local food. So the first is fresh food procurement. So if you're feeding people and you engage in local food, you're going to have a higher access to fresh food. And chances are, if it's grown in partnership with a community garden, it's free. So you've got fresh food in a quite an accessible, easy way. And that, of course, increases the health of your participants. So, you know, when we ask ourselves, well, what's really important about that? If we go back to the second slide, the $7.33 a day, if somebody is reliant on food charity in order to feed themselves, then I think we can ascertain that the quality of the food that they get really matters. So it might be that, so for example, in Cambridge, you can get a meal a day. So if you're getting one meal a day, it has to be a meal that is nutritious and healthy and good for you, and not, let's say, craft dinner. So these organizations are really becoming leaders who are noticing that the quality of the food that they feed people is really essential, and they're really stepping up to the plate to do that. One thing to think about is that there is no one size fits all model in the food charity system. Every organization is very different. One of the things that is quite interesting to discuss is the concept of local food centers and whether they're better, because food banks have had a lot of criticism, and certainly rightfully so, by poverty and food advocates, mainly around the reality that food banks are a Band-Aid solution. And the argument is that in the government being allowed to have a Band-Aid solution, they're not doing their job of feeding people properly. So for example, if we're looking at a true food justice model, many would argue that a radical redistribution of the world's wealth and minimum income guarantees for people would really be the way to provide justice. So many food banks have taken up that torch, such as the Cambridge Food Bank. And now, arguably, we're entering an era where these two are sort of meeting, and it's really hard to tell the difference. In a lot of ways, the Cambridge Food Bank is a local food center now. And because they are much larger, they've been around since the 80s, they're quite embedded in the community. In some ways, they're able to do that job better than a local food center because of their size. So in many ways, part of being a local food advocate is encouraging these food banks to take up the local food torch, because they have the infrastructure to do that in a really, really good way. So we talked a little bit about reasons why an organization might want to engage in local food. And one of them is that you are inspiring the community. So I want to show this photo because this is quite literally the result of inspiring the community. This is what it looks like. This is not grown in our garden. This is grown in other people's gardens. These are grown in local farms. So when people catch wind of the fact that the food bank wants fresh food, this is what ends up coming through the doors. So while we calculated 35,000 pounds of what we have grown ourselves, it's not capturing the many other thousands of pounds that have come through the door based on the work itself inspiring the community overall. So in closing, I want to go back to the first question, which is it charity or is it justice? And to leave us with the thought of we mop the ocean with a paper towel. So I would say that there's a lot that isn't working about food charity. And certainly I think Steffanie is exploring that much more deeply in this course as we go along. And it would take many, many hours to do more of that here. And I know that I'm out of time. So there's a lot problematic with the food charity model. And yet it's what we have. People are hungry today. And to me, infusing that system with healthy, local, fresh, organic, making it accessible to people who need it, is a very logical response to the current situation.